Everyone, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm here today to talk about my background in nursing, the reason I chose nursing education as a major, and the values that I believe are important for every nurse educator to possess. So, I graduated in 2015, and I quickly accepted a job in the surgical intensive care unit with a 6 month residency program. So during that 6 month residency program, I encountered many nurse educators that facilitated my transition from being a new graduate nurse to a nurse that's independent on the unit. So after I graduated from that residency program, I kind of had a feeling that nursing education would be an interesting field to get into. But I wanted to put in a couple years as a bedside nurse before I ventured further into that. So after putting in around 2.5 years as a bedside nurse, I decided to take a part-time job as a clinical instructor for LPN students just to see and make sure that nursing education was the right field for me. So I accepted an LPN instructor job, and as soon as I finished my first clinical, I knew that nursing education was the right career choice for me. Um, so the reason I chose nursing education as a major is to pretty much give back to the future generation of nurses what nurse educators provided for me. And that is a supportive learning environment and an area of no judgment and just feeling comfortable with anything that's new to new graduate nurses. So, the three values that I feel are important for every nurse educator to possess are passion, flexibility, and competence. So, with the first value, passion, this is very important because if a nurse educator isn't passionate about what she's teaching, this can negatively impact the student's success throughout the course. If a nurse educator is passionate about what they're teaching, that passion can spread to the student, and the student will consequently be more interested and inspired to learn and absorb all the information that the nurse educator can share with the learner. The second value that I believe that every nurse educator should possess is flexibility. And flexibility kind of has multiple stems, like has multiple values that kind of stem off of it, including being open minded and being culturally competent. So, flexibility in general means that a nurse educator is able to gracefully adapt to changes. And an example of this would be, let's say, a clinical instructor made up patient assignments for the day. And right before the beginning of the shift, one of the patients that was assigned to a student, decided that they didn't want any students following them throughout the day. So the nurse educator that's flexible would be able to adapt to that change, quickly figure out another patient that would be appropriate for that student, or have the student float to maybe like a diagnostic area or somewhere that the student can learn something for the day rather than focusing on the stuff that happened bad for the day. So open-mindedness is a value that kind of stems from being flexible, and being open-minded pretty much means that the nurse educator is providing an environment that fosters learning and encourages nursing students to ask questions and bring up any doubts that they may have to make sure that the student is learning what they need to learn. And this is important because I feel like new graduate nurses are very scared of being judged, and they feel like some of their questions are stupid, and nurse educators should make sure that the students feel free to come to them, and that they are approachable, so that everything is being met for their learning needs. Another stem of flexibility is cultural competence. And this is very important because there are just so many different cultures, and within those cultures, there are there are different needs from every culture. So when, as a nurse educator, in order to be culturally competent, you need to be flexible and be able to accept differences of cultures. So a good example that I can think of is a clinical instructor of mine during my OB clinical as an undergrad. So this clinical instructor assigned a male nursing student to a patient that preferred not to have males inside the room due to religious reasons. So unfortunately, my nursing instructor wasn't aware of this preference, so she went ahead and assigned this male nurse to the patient. After the male nursing student went into the patient's room, the family was very upset because this wasn't the first time that this happened. So my clinical instructor personally apologized to the patient and the patient's family and worked with the nurses on the unit to make sure that this didn't happen again. So she created, with the nurses, she created like a sign that went right outside the door. And also put a note in the chart as well to make sure that everyone that went into the patient's chart knew that she preferred not to have males involved in her care. So to me, this shows that the clinical instructor was very culturally competent because she respected the patient's wishes and made sure that whatever the patient preferred was met. So the last value that I believe is important for nurse educators to possess is the last value that I believe is important for nurse educators to possess is competence. And competence is important for nurse educators to possess for obvious reasons. Because if a nurse educator isn't competent, they would not be able to effectively teach the subject matter and the student would be at a disadvantage. So competence can be achieved through bedside experience. It can be achieved through pursuing a master's degree in education or any other master's degree just furthering their education. It can be achieved through certifications, just promoting like an ongoing learning environment. So just making sure to continuously be learning, that will be enough to be competent. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you.